I'm Catharine Dockery, the founding partner of Vice Ventures. Vice Ventures was born out of complete frustration. As I was looking to leave Walmart e-commerce, I was interviewing at tons of funds. All the funds asked me to pitch a company, so I pitched the first company I'd ever invested in, which is a business called Bev, which is a direct-to-consumer rosé. As I was interviewing, I continued to pitch it. All of these fund managers, a lot of them had ended up personally investing in the business, but said they couldn't do it out of the fund because they had this alcohol clause that prohibited them from investing in alcohol. So they asked me what else I believed in. So I talked about nicotine, cannabis, other alcohol businesses, anything sex-related, psychedelics, and they asked me why. And as we're potentially going into recession, I thought the only way that you could get return in consumer venture capital would be through investing in Vice brands. Because if you think about, for example, who outperforms during a recession, it's Altria, it's Constellation, it's Diageo, it's AB InBev. And as the laws are changing and as these new brands continue to form, I think those are going to be the only targets for acquisition. So there are all these fund managers who were like, you know, Catherine, like, we don't disagree with you. We just can't invest in that, but we love it. So then I couldn't take any of these jobs of other places that I didn't necessarily want to do or didn't believe in the strategy of. So then from there, I was taking every meeting possible. And then one of the people I met with was the founder of this business called Recess. And Recess is a direct-to-consumer, but now it's omni-channel, CBD sparkling water. And the brand kind of stands for nostalgia and stands for taking a break from your everyday, like actually going out and taking a recess. And once I heard of it, I loved it, and I could see it being much bigger than beverage and turning into a media business. And the founder is one of my favorite people on the planet, and I think he has like the utmost intellectual honesty for everything that he does. So I asked him how I could be helpful. He said he needed help raising capital. He said he's spoken to tons of funds. A lot of them didn't want to do it because of CBD or because they didn't invest in beverage. I was like, well, I could definitely help you do that. I just did this for multiple businesses. So I sent out tons of emails. None of the funds would take the meeting. Some of them did. Spent time with the junior people, watched a lot of these funds raise SPVs, and then had this realization that I could do the same thing. So I cold emailed over 350 people, became one of the biggest investors in the business, became Ben's biggest believer, would help him think through everything, was honored enough to spend time with him. And then I had about 100 founders come to me. From all the Vice categories, asking me, where do we do banking? How do we acquire customers without advertising? Where can we do payment processing? Like, who's the best lawyer for this? And then me being like, that's a great question. I have no idea. But then finding the answer, and then emailing other Vice founders and other Vice investors, and then learning and going back and helping them think about how to go about this whole process. So then thinking more about the businesses and realizing all the valuations were less than $10 million at the seed stage, and nobody else could invest in these businesses. And it was the best way for me to get involved to create this community and legitimize the Vice category by creating a community of Vice founders who could work together and grow together. So working for Andy Dunn of Bonobos, I had formed a lot of really deep relationships with other founders and other investors. So when I left, I just cold emailed them and I'm like, hi, do you remember me? It's Catherine. And kind of bothering a lot of these people until they took a meeting with me. And after they took the meeting, at the end of it, they were like, we love what you're doing, we love your passion, how can we be helpful? And then me being very upfront, being like, well, like, if you have anybody I should meet, I'd love to meet them. And I'd love if you could invest. And then either getting checks or getting intros to 10 other people who could then invest, or introduce me to 10 other friends, and just being very bold and asking direct questions. Catherine is totally out of her mind. Catherine is very outspoken. She's very bold, and because of that, I'm clearly a younger woman, and I think I also don't work well on teams because of that. Because some people are like, well, interesting idea, I don't know if that's gonna work. I'm like, that doesn't make any sense, and that would never work. And I don't think people have a great time with like that type of direct honesty coming from someone who's 26. So it all started, I was at NYU and I wanted to be some type of neurosurgeon or doctor. And I had tons of student debt going to NYU. And then I spoke with a lot of people who had gone to graduate school and they came back and I'm like, are you happy? And they're like, no, we're so unhappy. Like we have even more student debt. And then I realized that that would probably lead me to a very unhappy path. So I took an internship on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange and I loved it. And I saw so many parallels with the equity market and behavioral finance and like why markets move the way they did. So then I started writing this blog called Dockery's Daily Docket. And I would wake up at 4:30 every morning in college to write it. And I had an editorial piece about why I thought the markets were moving. Or one piece, for example, I wrote about like salmon trading in the Tanga River in Norway. And I kind of made this assumption that the futures prices would go like skyrocket because global warming was affecting the temperatures in the river. And I was right. But anyway, so from there I had 500 daily readers at tons of hedge funds, at tons of banks, and the floor of the exchange. So that's kind of how I studied neuroscience. Don't be afraid and don't stop. I think if I had ever been afraid or had ever felt inhibited by fear, I would never be able to go and start a fund just for Vice Ventures, investing in things that other people don't want to invest in. Because kind of what I'm doing, like a lot of my family is like, you're gonna get arrested. And if I had like any fear that I definitely would not be doing this. It's made me very angry. As I was interviewing, everybody was like, oh, we don't touch that. Like, we can't invest in alcohol. Like, cannabis is terrible. Like, psychedelics are awful. And now that I'm like reforming these relationships and going to talk to the people that I had spoken with 6 to 8 months ago, they're like, no. It's not that we can't invest in that. It's just we just don't believe that's the right thing to do. But then you kind of think about who decides what's vice and what isn't vice. And it's bananas to me that people have these very strong opinions and don't really have any reason why or why not. Like, there's no reason to me that cannabis should be so horrible, or like sex toys, you can't talk about it. And like, you can't tell me that people don't use porn regularly. And there's no reason why you can't openly discuss about it as an investment. I mean, I had no network when I first started. And a lot of the network, people knew me by email or just saw my name in their inbox, but didn't really know anything about me. So at the beginning, it was definitely just getting meetings and learning how to pitch, because I never raised money for myself before. Like, I don't come from a family where anybody could help me do this. So it was kind of learning what resonated with people. And also like giving my message of like, vice isn't all bad. And like, vice is not equal evil. And in a world of Juul, it's definitely hard to communicate sometimes. Just people being more open-minded. And I feel like VC a lot of the time is now just the new banking. And you have a lot of people who came from consulting or who came from business school, and they're like taught like, this is the way you think, like this is how you stand in line at Disney World. And I think the whole reason to be in venture is not to ask like, what's a historical revenue like in this category? It's like, do I think this will be a category? Do I think people will buy these products? Like, would I buy these products? Would my friends? Like, would my little sister Instagram it? And I think that's the questions that should be asked instead of like, did this exist before? There's this company I absolutely love called Lucy. It's a nicotine business, and the whole idea there is that nicotine isn't absolutely terrible. And there's a way that you can enjoy nicotine without it completely harming your body. And I love the founding team there, and I'm super impressed with what they're doing, and I'm so excited to hopefully be part of their success.